Mashle's future might already be doomed. That's a bold statement considering the anime just started, but there's a slight change it's made from the manga that has moved it in the wrong direction. This is coming from someone who read the manga when Chapter 1 released, followed it on a weekly basis, and watched it become what it is today. When Chapter 1 dropped, people were calling it the next One Punch Man, or the manga that was better than One Punch Man, or One Punch Man meets insert random magic anime. That is the kind of potential this anime had, and that is clearly what the studio is going for. For those of you who haven't noticed, or if you're just anime only, Mashle seems to be following the direction of the One Punch Man anime, by relying less on comedy and heavily leaning into the action. For example, in the fight in episode 1, they cut out these deadpans where the bad guy just sits there dumbfounded by Mash physically parrying his magic fireballs. In the anime, you get the usual, "What? Nobody can deflect the Emerald Splash." By doing so, this makes for a more intense scene, highlighting the excitement from the action rather than focusing on the absurdity of Mash's abilities. Now, as far as I can remember, Madhouse didn't do anything like this in One Punch Man Season 1. The Season 1 adaptation was fairly cut and paste. A1, on the other hand, seems to be taking more creative liberty, and in that practice they're making the Mashle anime more like One Punch Man, not in the sense of changing the source material, but leaning more into the action. Both series started out with a solid balance of action and comedy, each starting out more so as comedies, but then slowly following the usual tropes of any battle series. This worked out for One Punch Man, so obviously it would work out for Mashle, right? Unfortunately, no, not really. See, the One Punch Man manga has focused more and more on the action, but it also has the tools to be able to do that. First of all, you have the godlike talent of Yusuke Murata to carry a lot of the fights. Even if some of the fights might feel similar, they're so insanely gorgeous to watch that you can't really complain. Mashle does look good, but obviously the art doesn't come close to that of Murata's. So when you have fights that are drawn well but aren't necessarily drawn amazingly, you can't really rely on the art to carry those fights. There are some panels I can probably point to where I was like, damn, this is really good, but those don't come up all that often. Now, I say that the art can carry the fights in One Punch Man, but the reality is that there is more to the fights than the art. Another element to these fights is the incredible diversity in characters and abilities. You have badass ninjas like Flashy Flash, cool-looking robots and cyborgs like Genos and Drive Knight, and tons more that don't necessarily fall into neat little categories. There's just so many different kinds of characters in One Punch Man that, even if the fights might feel repetitive at times, you're always getting some new ability or some new spin on things. Whether it's a traditional martial artist, a ninja, or an athlete that just crushes people with her thighs. Mashle, on the other hand, does not have this. Don't get me wrong, Mashle has some great characters, but their strengths are not their bizarre abilities. The power system in Mashle is your typical magic anime power system. Everyone can use magic except for Mashle. Person A uses fire magic, person B uses metal magic, person C uses music magic, and so on and so on. There are some cool fights, but for the most part they're all kinda the same. Ex-villain has crazy new kind of magic, good guy has to figure out how to beat said magic, good guy figures it out and wins the fight, rinse and repeat. I will admit that Mashle has the unique addition of certain transformations like god forms of wands, but those don't really do enough to change the overall feel of the fights. And that feeling is that when you focus on just the fights, Mashle feels like just another magic anime. But that is when you only focus on the fights. When you focus on the characters and their quirks, that is when Mashle shows its personality. But before I explain why that is, make sure to like the video if you've been enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. Now, Mashle's characters are pretty tropey, but rather than trying to work around them or reinvent those tropes, Mashle leans into them and leans into them hard. You have Lance, whose only real flaw is his borderline disturbing love for his little sister, Dot, the spiky-haired protagonist of his own story, Lemon, who is madly in love with Mash and considers holding hands to be some kind of wedding engagement, and Finn, the textbook straight man who just can't seem to catch a break. There's plenty more, but those are the core characters. They might be walking tropes, but they make the story of Mashle with their running gags, over-the-top behavior, and perfectly crafted chemistry. Their strange quirks balance off of each other and make for a charming and lovable cast of characters that you love to see interacting in between fights. Which is another reason I'm worried about the direction of the anime. Sure, making small changes to fights here and there might not seem like such a big deal. The main content is still there and viewers are going to get the same basic story. However, this will become a problem as time goes on and A1 slowly cuts more and more of the fights. If this goes on, then these quirky characters will have less of their gags appear in the anime as the source material is rearranged for the sake of intensity. Add enough of these changes and suddenly the characters each feel less unique and their collective chemistry suffers as a whole. So this is why I'm worried about the direction the anime is headed in. It seems like it's going to sacrifice some of its comedy for the sake of more action. While that might allow A1 to market Mashle with flashy animation, it will expose some of Mashle's relative weakness when compared to similar manga, and take away from its core strengths of comedy and characters. At this point, you're probably wondering why this is such a bad thing. If anything, all it really sounds like they're doing is moving priorities around and maintaining the same general balance. Flashy fights can get an anime trending as proven by Demon Slayer, and Mashle is good enough to have gotten an anime adaptation. So why worry if it's just a little less funny? While this shift isn't a bad thing per se, it seems like a poor decision given the trend the Mashle manga has followed. Like I mentioned before, the manga starts out very clearly as a comedy. There's a lot of tropes, a lot of deadpans, and a lot of cream puffs. But as the power system is fleshed out and the plot develops towards the halfway point of the overall story, Mashle focuses less on the comedy and more on the fights and the plot surrounding the villains and Mashle's origins. Again, this isn't a bad thing per se, but by doing so, Mashle moved away from what a lot of people were actually sold on. Whereas this worked out for One Punch Man, this didn't work out so well for Mashle for all of the reasons I've already mentioned so far. You don't have the sheer talent of someone like Yusuke Murata, the power system isn't as diverse or unique, and the characters don't stand out as much in fights. Admittedly, there are plenty of people that think Mashle is still as good as it was before, and that's fine. If you prefer the action, then that's okay because one isn't necessarily better than the other. But here's what we can say happened at the very least. Mashle, at least from my perspective, went from the next One Punch Man that everyone was talking about to another Shonen Jump battle series that only comes after conversations about Chainsaw Man, JJK, One Piece, MHA, and Black Clover. The series has fallen from potentially the next big thing to the thing that so many other series already do. Now, I know I sound all doom and gloom, so I do have a silver lining. While the Mashle anime might not blow up like its biggest fans are hoping for, it's still going to be a perfectly good anime. Like I said, while A1 might cut out some of the deadpans and other panels, the same core content is still gonna be there. You're still gonna have Mash offering homemade cream puffs. You're still going to have Lemon blushing at the thought of holding hands with Mash. You're still going to have Dot screaming like the parody of Shonen MCs like he is. And plenty more of the classic Mashle gags. Plus, while it might not be the next big thing, I'm genuinely excited to see how some of these fights are going to look once they're animated. In fact, if I'm being perfectly honest, they might actually be better than the source material. While the loss of some of the funny scenes might hurt the overall adaptation, building the intensity might make each individual fight better on their own. So this is where I'd like your input. Do you think this shift will hurt the Mashle anime? Or do you actually think the anime will surpass the manga? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like another discussion like this one, then check out my recent Chainsaw Man video. In that video, I explain how Chainsaw Man will change after part 2 and whether we can expect a part 3. You can find that video in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.